Last March, a bunch of professional skiers and snowboarders gathered in a ballroom in Park City, Utah, to honor a few legends.
It's an annual party the U.S. Ski and Snowboard Hall of Fame throws to induct a new class of athletes who have made their mark in snow sports.
Imagine rocketing down a harrowing steep mountainside at nearly 250 kilometers an hour. It's exhilarating. It takes your breath away, and there is simply no option for error.
In a highly produced sequence of tribute videos and MC remarks, these events highlight biographies and career accomplishments. And last March, the Hall of Fame took a little time to recognize a person of color.
In a career spanning 17 years, Native American Ross Anderson became the fastest skier in the Western Hemisphere. Anderson was born in New Mexico. He grew up in Durango, Colorado.
This ceremony marks a major watershed in Ross Anderson's career. It's also a big moment for the Hall of Fame, and the MCs shower Ross with loving praise.
World-class athletes seize the opportunities presented to them.
Employing a familiar language we often use when we talk about elite competitors in sports.
And like all great athletes, he bet on himself to be a winner, a champion, and a record holder.
The words and images are heartfelt. They do mention Ross's native heritage, and it's about time the Hall of Fame recognized Ross Anderson. And yet, something is missing from their tribute to him.
What's remarkable is what goes unsaid. And watching the video footage, we wondered whether the ski industry people assembled that night sensed an invisible presence in that ballroom, the uncomfortable truths about professional skiing.
It's not as if we expect professional snowboards to suddenly raise its collective hand and admit to a legacy of exclusivity and money privilege, although that would have made the evening very interesting.
But when Ross Anderson steps onto the stage to be inducted, the fact that he's there at all is truly extraordinary. Ross Anderson is a unicorn in professional skiing, the first, the only Native American ever to be inducted into the Hall of Fame. And he went 154.06 miles per hour on skis.
You can count the number of Native Americans in pro skiing history on one hand. And so when we heard Ross Anderson was being inducted into the Hall of Fame, we wondered, why are Indigenous athletes so rare in professional snow sports?
We also wondered what Ross Anderson endured to make it to that award ceremony. Are there Native athletes following in his footsteps?
And why is it so hard, even now, for the professional skiing establishment to talk about inclusion and racial identity?
It truly is an honor to be chosen.
When Anderson finally takes to the podium, he alludes just a little to the challenges he faced as a young skier.
When I was growing up, I was always challenged and tested, either because of my color, my skin, or being different as a Native American Indian.
This is a story about one Indigenous athlete's quest to storm the White Castle of professional skiing.
And maybe not to burn the fort to the ground, but definitely to kick the glass door in.
Anderson's ancestry is Cheyenne, Arapaho, Chiricahua, and Mescalero Apache, but he never knew his biological parents as a child. He grew up in Durango, Colorado, adopted by white parents who lived here. And like a lot of Durango kids, he learned to ski.
When I was a kid, at the house, we had a mountain there, and I had my own little run, climb up, use dead oak trees as my gates, and I trained. until it was dark enough that I couldn't see no more.
In other words, Ross had drive, and by the time he was 10 years old, he knew he was a gifted skier.
I had rhythm. I wasn't afraid to make a line that goes vertical all the way down the mountain, and I lived to go fast.
But even as he excelled in a community full of extreme athletes and more than a few Olympians, Ross struggled with his own racial identity.
They did know, but they kind of ignored it too. I had issues back then of what my identity was. When I was a kid, I looked in the mirror and didn't feel right because you felt like you needed to be lighter. As a teenager, it was difficult. Getting teased because you're darker than the other people, and the worst of the worst was, using sandpaper or glue stones on skin to make it lighter. I did that, a few times.
As a child, Ross was alone in these emotional struggles. He talked a little bit with his parents about what he was feeling, but not much.
They did know, but they kind of ignored it too. And I'm sure that was the case, was just not knowing what to do during that time because I was different.
As a child, Ross said he was teased, that he got into fights sometimes. He gained the respect of older kids who stuck up for him, and he focused on his skiing. But when he watched the Olympics or looked at ski magazines, he says the experience could be unsettling.
There was nobody of color. It was all Caucasian. It's all you saw, the French or the Italians. I wasn't white, I wasn't Caucasian, I wasn't the ideal trophy athlete who always is in the public eye and whatnot. If I wasn't that color, then I'm not gonna make it. When I was a teenager, 17, 18, is when I shifted that to change things. That's kind of where I started trying to get a better idea of who I was, who I am. So I had this vision. I saw skiing, didn't know what category of skiing was going to be, and decided, you know what, I'm just going to do it because there's nobody of color. Just as long as I'm able to be in the World Cup, I think I'll make a difference.
It turned out that Durango, Colorado was a perfect town for a young athlete looking to break into World Cup skiing.
That's the best part about this town. It's so full of World Cuppers and Olympians that you can't hardly go out to breakfast without getting in a pancake eating contest with somebody. It's very competitive.
Dale Womack raced World Cup as a speed skier, and in 1992, he competed in the only Olympics in history that hosted a speed skiing competition.
I met Ross Anderson. I probably met him when I was racing for Fort Lewis because we used to train a lot together with the Purgatory ski team. It's pretty easy to spot that fire in the younger generations, and saw Ross liked to go fast and was absolutely fearless and pretty stout. He's built for it. It's good to have some size and some strength for sure.
It was Dale Womack who encouraged Ross to get into speed skiing.
I remember bumping into him and we were talking about skiing and racing, and I said, Ross, you'd probably be pretty good at speed skiing. You ought to give it a shot. Let's get you set up with some gear and get you to a couple races.
Within a few years, Anderson was competing internationally in World Cup races for the U.S. As he got better at speed skiing, he encountered hostility from teammates.
It was just a handful, but talking behind your back and the way they intimidate you and teasing you right in front of everybody.
At a race race in Snowmass, Colorado, Ross was checking in at the registration desk when one of his U.S. teammates approached him.
This guy comes up, and I raced with him before, and I've actually helped him out too. And he starts putting me down, like, you know, look, this is Ross Anderson. This is Ross. Hey, everybody, this is Ross Anderson. And then got in my face, and I didn't back down. And you know, he said, I don't know why you're here, and you're not going to do anything good here. So why don't you just go home? And nobody's really doing anything about it either. They were just kind of laughing and standing back. So kept my posture, but to the point where I almost didn't even race.
For a moment, Ross felt ready to leave ski racing behind, but he talked for a while with one of his close friends, U.S. speed skier Jeff Hamilton, who broke the world speed record in 1995. Hamilton convinced Ross to stick it out, even though his other teammate was being a jerk.
I finally registered and raced him and beat him, and you know, but that was really hard because I could have quit right there.
You might think, what's the big deal? Professional athletes are always trash talking each other. Maybe the hostility Ross experienced from teammates was just an example of the way competitors play head games to push each other off balance.
But the small group of U.S. skiers who hazed Ross Anderson kept going. At another race, Ross had just completed a run and entered the area where skiers gathered between races.
It was in the finish area, basically where all the athletes hang out. I finished my run and kind of hear in the background the native hollering, you know, the hand, you know, that kind of thing, kind of teasing and making fun of the native culture, which, you know, I didn't appreciate, but I ignored it too at the same time. I really didn't do anything about it. During that time, I just raced and did what I had to do.
Being the adopted son of white parents, Ross Anderson was raised not knowing anything about tribal culture. As he grew older, Ross started exploring his own native identity.
I was like a sponge. I soaked everything in, learned a lot over at the Southern Ute tribe, talked to the elders over there. You know, I had friends over there that had big families and went to some of their bear dances and powwows and whatnot. And that's how I learned really, is doing it the way I wanted to.
And Ross started to offer a prayer before each race.
I go out to the snow, I kneel and pick up the snow with my hands and pray to where I'm racing at, and do my prayer with my medicine bag, and then I walk back to where the warm-up place is, where everybody else is. So I was not afraid to have everybody watching. I made sure people knew that I was very proud of being a Native American Indian. It's about asking to be on Mother Earth, not just taking. It made sense to me to do anywhere I went when I raced.
Around that time, Ross also decided to airbrush his red racing helmet with a feather headdress.
So in the very beginning, when I started speed skiing, my biggest thing was to represent Native Americans because I'm one. And so my thought was, what would be the best way to represent? And it was the helmet with the war bonnet. And I dreamt about this too, multiple times before I designed it. So the record helmet has an eagle head on the front, on the war bonnet, with the golden feathers on it. And it's representing the Native culture, represents all Native Americans. And so every time they put it on, it's kind of like being a superhero in a way, where you put on your superhero gear. You look fast, you look slick with the helmets that go over your shoulder, the tight suits, and the fairings behind your calves. You look like a rocket.
In the early 2000s, Ross started to make his mark on the World Cup circuit. He had sponsors and opportunities to compete against elite skiers in the final rounds of competitions. He became a superhero speed skier. Superpower, maximum velocity.
In speed skiing, the fastest time wins the race. Skiers go straight down a steep incline that runs about a mile, wearing rubber suits and teardrop-shaped helmets that come down to their shoulders to minimize wind resistance.
Ski commentators, journalists, and documentary filmmakers have tried many times to describe what it must be like to go 154 miles an hour on skis. It's hard to imagine.
You know how fast he went, 154 miles an hour. Have you ever been that fast without an airplane?
When we reached out to ski legend and Olympic medalist Billy Kidd, he helped us understand speed skiing a little better. The physics of skis, the icy slopes, the sheer velocities.
When you are going 154 miles an hour on skis, you are standing literally an inch and a half off the snow. And if you were to get scared and just say, oh, I'm going too fast, and stand up, the wind hitting your chest would flip you right over backwards.
Billy Kidd was not a speed skier himself, but he knew many during his career as a racer and ski commentator on TV.
Well, a friend of mine he held the world speed record in speed skiing, just like Ross did. He fell down at about 130 miles an hour, and he said just the friction of sliding along on the snow melted his nylon suit right into his skin. So even if you don't break your leg or neck or do serious damage, you've got all these consequences which make Ross's pursuit of the speed record even more incredible.
In our conversation with Billy Kidd, he said something else that stuck with us. It was when we asked him about the importance of Ross Anderson's native identity and his induction into the Hall of Fame.
He's not getting inducted because he's Native American, it's because he's the best.
Surely it's true that Ross would not be a Hall of Famer without the speed record, but with all due respect to Billy Kidd, we think this is a blind spot in the world of professional skiing. The industry may not see Ross's accomplishments and his native identity as being intertwined, but Ross does, and so do we.
And on the steep, icy slopes of the French Alps, when Ross was competing, he brought all of himself. His gear, his technique, his medicine bag, and his prayers. All the things he endured as a Native American man to reach the elite level.
He competed right alongside the greatest European skiers who showed him the respect and dignity that some of his US teammates never offered. He did it his way, right down to the music he listened to when he raced.
You might think that the tough, steely athletes who rocket down icy slopes listen to heavy thumping metal music. Not Ross. He prefers ethereal, new agey sounds.
I listen to Yanni,
As in the legendary Greek soft rock composer Yanni.
but you know, when I tell people, they say, "What do you mean you listen to Yanni?" So, but I do, and I find certain songs for certain days, for certain reasons, and that's where I envision myself in that song.
We couldn't find much footage of Ross Anderson racing, but here's audio from a short clip of Italian racer Simone Orgone, just to give you a sense of what it's like to be nearby when a speed skier goes rocketing past.
The wind itself sounds so intense, like a jet, but the ground closer to the track kind of vibrates a little bit too.
Ross says the gear and the environment make for a kind of tunnel vision coming down the race course.
You're about 1.5 feet off the ground because you're in a full-on tuck, and you're only seeing 20 feet in front of you.
Can you imagine driving a car over 100 miles an hour, but only being able to see down the road 20 feet in front of you? Ross says no big deal.
When everything works out, you actually go slower in your head, vision-wise, than you do in reality. So you can work with the wind, you can work with the drag, everything that you feel and hear, you kind of work with it. If you have any air that sounds louder than normal, then you can fix it. You can hear the wind kind of calm down a little, the tone of to the.
Ross set the U.S. record on a speed skiing course in Ozarks, France on April 19, 2006.
It was just amazing. I couldn't believe it. It took me a couple months for me to realize that I actually went that fast.
As a teenager, Ross Anderson set out to inspire people of color to become competitive skiers. For at least one Native Alaskan girl growing up in a remote fishing village, it worked.
I vividly remember his speed suit and how cool he looked, and seeing his headdress and the feathers on his helmet.
Callan Chifluk Sifsov is Yupik and Inupiaq. She grew up snowboarding with her brothers in the hills near her village in western Alaska.
Truly, there are no role models in that echelon of skiing and snowboarding to be found that are indigenous or outwardly presenting indigenous. And looking back, Ross Anderson was everything to me.
As a girl, she had a poster board in her room with cutouts of Native athletes like Jim Thorpe and Ross Anderson.
It's one thing to have, an idol that's on a Wheaties box, but when I looked at Ross, I saw someone that looked good, had the flashy race suit and helmet, and beat the white guys at their own game.
She went on to compete in World Cup snowboarding for a decade, and she represented the U.S. in the 2010 Winter Olympics.
Callan Chifluk Sifsov was the only indigenous athlete we could find in pro skiing and snowboarding who emerged in the years following Ross Anderson's career. But a single Native athlete makes a difference.
When just one single person is visible in these worlds of professional athletics, it opens the window for the next generation.
Callan says there are a number of barriers in pro skiing for Native athletes and people of color, like a lack of media attention and sponsorships, and the need for cultural sensitivity training for coaches, teammates, and staff.
But competing in an extreme sport also gave her an outlet to process what she says were some of the most emotionally difficult things she experienced as a Native woman.
Being a daredevil was my ticket to freedom and my escape from racism, my escape from bigotry, and I don't know if it's my competitive spirit, but experiencing racism and adversity almost fueled my competitive nature. For people like Ross and myself, we developed tools to utilize the marginalization, the racism, the adversity, and racist commentary, people trying to get in your head, that often fueled my performance, but more often than not, there was something it took away in the end. I really can't fathom what that would feel like as a person of color in a primarily white privileged sport to have representation and to have the assistance of the industry partners like your media outlets, your governing body, and I hope that each and every athlete coming after us do not have to overcome those obstacles in order to just participate.
When we contacted the U.S. Ski and Snowboard Hall of Fame to find out whether there were any other Native American athletes who had ever been inducted, they told us that the Hall of Fame does not keep track of racial identity.
When we contacted the U.S. Ski and Snowboard Association, the director of media and marketing acknowledged that professional winter sports struggles with racial inclusion, and she put us in touch with Henry Rivers.
Rivers is black and one of 2 people of color on the U.S. Ski and Snowboard's Board of Trustees. He also runs an organization called the National Brotherhood of Skiers, which brings together black people to participate in snow sports.
Representation is critical. If you don't see it, why would you ever want to be it? If you don't see it, you don't know it exists. Or it's so far-fetched that you're like, why would I even try?
Rivers says there needs to be more people of color inside of professional skiing and snowboarding, from coaches and staff to people in leadership positions.
A white person cannot see how the existing structure affects people of color and black people. So how do you come up with a solution unless you have guidance from someone that is personally affected by it?
And here's what Henry Rivers says is the most remarkable thing about Ross Anderson's success.
He was rock hard. He was very focused on what he wanted to do. It's like going through a gauntlet of discrimination. You're going right down the middle and not letting those things hit you, affect you, or stop you.
Henry Rivers equates Ross Anderson's journey in pro skiing with the careers of other trailblazing athletes who broke into white sports, competitors like Tiger Woods in golf and Venus and Serena Williams in tennis.
There was no one there to guide him to the accomplishments that he has achieved. So he had to do that with one motivation, and that was his love for the sport. That is what kept him insulated from all of the insults, all of the discrimination, all of the obstacles that were put in front of him. They probably never deterred him because of his love for the sport.
It would have been encouraging to hear some of these perspectives at the Hall of Fame festivities in Park City last March. To hear at least some awareness on the part of the skiing establishment that gathered to honor Ross Anderson.
Instead, the MCs and tribute video glossed over issues of representation. Maybe the Hall of Fame is the wrong venue for a conversation about racism and representation, or maybe the organization just lacked the courage and the awareness to go there.
But Ross Anderson did not lack the courage to go there. He entered the room and took the stage to sounds of a Lakota girl singing a prayer song.
Having that song change the culture in that room. People realizing, wow, we got something different. This is great.
In his acceptance speech, Ross only alludes to the indignities he endured on the U.S. ski team. His remarks are humble, respectful, polite, understated.
And even though there were almost certainly no other Native athletes in the audience that night, Ross speaks directly to them anyway.
I will say this to Indian country: never let anyone tell you that you can't.
We wonder about the long pause in between the words and the audience applause. Let's listen again.
Never let anyone tell you that you can't.
Could that empty silence mark a gulf between the white people in the audience and the indigenous athlete on the stage? Might it reveal misunderstanding, ignorance, even some resistance to Ross's message? It's hard to say for sure.
When he finishes his speech, Ross lifts an eagle feather over his head, and he just stands there.
The camera pans across the audience. Everyone in the ballroom stands too and applauds. It goes on.
I've always had that eagle feather, and my vision was when I was done with my speech, I would raise it above my head for pride and representation
Ross Anderson standing in front of a ballroom filled with almost entirely white skiers and snowboarders, holding an eagle feather above his head.
Maybe this image will help young Indigenous athletes see themselves in winter sports.
Maybe it'll pop up on a Wheaties box someday.
And maybe, just maybe, the triumph of Ross Anderson will plant the seeds for a new generation of Native American superheroes on skis.